Okay, colleagues, it's early in the morning, but I have my mic on, so you can hear me. While we may see some people come into the room, it's time to begin this session on such an important topic as the way we can mobilize funding through taxation. And I'm very much looking forward to this session. My name is Ulrika Moder, and I'm Assistant Secretary General with UNDP, and we have accompanied the work on taxation for a long time in a very appreciated partnership with OECD. So I'm really happy to welcome you, but also those of you who accompany this online, either as we broadcast it now, or if you find this session and find it interesting later on, as you will find it online, both on the Global Partnership website, but also, of course, if you look into the work that we do on tax inspectors without borders. Very soon I will have me here on the stage, Honorable Professor Michuli Nkube, who is the Minister of Finance and Economic Development from Zimbabwe. I will have His Excellency John Banzalunda, who is Member of Parliament and Chair of the Parliamentary Network for the Sustainable Development Goals from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I will have Mr. John Christensen, who is joining us virtually, the Director of Balanced Economy Project, and Mr. Ben Dickinson, who is the Head of Global Relations and Development Division at the Center of Tax Policy and Administration at the OECD. And we will also be able to be joined also by some comment and reflections, and you will definitely also be able to ask questions and interact with us either virtually or also from the floor. Just to get us started, and a reminder, and of course this is what we have been discussing these days as we have come together to look for ways of making our partnership more effective towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The goals is the best framework that we have to really call for action and see how we can do this. That is how we can push back on the increasing poverty that we see, the increasing inequality, how we can also protect planet and ensure that people around the world actually enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. But to achieve these ambitious goals, we also know that we have to be even more clever. We need to work so much harder. I have alluded to the fact that UNDP in our latest Human Development Report saw 9 out of 10 countries in the world move in reverse to the indicators that we have set up with regards to human development. And as we now also move towards the SDGs summit to take place in New York in September next year, we will most likely see quite depressing numbers. But there are always time to turn things around. And in this room, and those who accompany us online as well, you will be interested to see how efficient and effective tax systems can actually be that key building block for resilient economies that also provide one of the most stable funding resources that we can find for the fulfillment of the 2030 agenda. But as we know, also building the social contract that is so much needed, and the way we also design our tax reforms will be a way to take us towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because effective and efficient and also fair taxation requires equipping developing countries with the expertise and the technology needed to strengthen tax systems, but also, as we know, to tackle the illicit financial flows that have become one of the main hindrances for many, many people, whether politicians or tax inspectors, working to make sure that this financing flow can be driven towards can take us towards the Sustainable Development Goals. As I said, it's about capacity, but it's also about trust. It's also about the social contract. And we cannot work in silos to tackle interconnected challenges. We need to look at how we can be of support from the multilateral system, whether from the OECD or the UN and UNDP, because we want really to be that global network to share experiences and to develop the expertise needed. As I shared, we are working together hand in hand, UNDP and the OECD, and the Tax Inspectors Without Borders is, as you will hear also, a multi-stakeholder approach to strengthen countries' tax system, to increase the domestic revenue, and to help to achieve the SDGs. We are supporting, through the Tax Inspectors Without Borders, tax audit capacity, and we also see the return of investments. Out of $127 gained for every $1 spent on the program. So it's quite amazing actually what we can do if we work together. And $1.7 billion in additional revenue collected to date through the support to tax administrations in 56 developing countries so far. This initiative is really a prime example of what we can achieve when we work together and when we build experience together to make sure that we can reach towards the goals and that we also, at the end of the day, can have impact on the ground. But before the discussion starts, I would like to invite you to watch a short introductory video about the partnership and how it works. So let's see if we can have that on the screen.
Tax Inspectors Without Borders, a joint OECD-UNDP initiative. Tax revenues are the main source of development financing and for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Significant finances are needed to build roads, schools, hospitals, access to clean water, and other critical services in developing countries. However, global tax avoidance schemes may reduce a country's ability to finance public expenditure. Many tax administrations struggle to verify and contest international transactions which minimize tax liability. Tax administrations also experience challenges with tax base erosion and profit shifting to low or no tax jurisdictions. TIWB is an innovative tool to address these concerns. It is a niche form of assistance launched in 2015 to help developing countries build audit capacity in international taxation. TIWB programs help tax administrations effectively apply international standards to mobilize domestic resources. The assistance may result in increased revenues, improved auditor confidence, and better taxpayer compliance. TIWB supplies experienced experts to help tax officials audit multinational enterprises by providing hands-on technical support. Rather than substituting for local auditors, TIWB experts work alongside them. TIWB experts use a learning-by-doing approach, working directly with tax auditors on current audit cases. A typical TIWB program includes both on-site and virtual missions delivered by the expert to the host administration over an 18 to 24-month period. During on-site missions, a tax administration may host the expert for 1 to 2 weeks at a time every 3 months. Virtual missions are facilitated more frequently by the TIWB expert, who can assist and provide guidance remotely through telephone, email, or video conference. The TIWB Secretariat offers tailor-made programs based on the specific needs and priorities of a tax administration. TIWB brings together host administrations, partner administrations, tax audit experts, and donors to achieve desired results. Host administrations request and integrate TIWB support. Partner administrations deploy currently serving tax audit experts. Experienced auditors can join the UNDP-managed roster of experts. Donors finance TIWB programs. TIWB program costs may be financed by partner administrations, donors, or host administrations. A typical TIWB program cycle has 6 basic steps: identification of audit assistance needs, completion of an online assistance request, identification and selection of the TIWB expert with whom the host administration would like to work, signing of terms of reference between the relevant parties, commencement of the TIWB program either on-site or virtually, and finally, monitoring and reporting conducted via progress reviews and evaluations. The Secretariat supports all stakeholders in program execution. You can find more information about the TIWB initiative on www.tiwb.org or send us an email at secretariat@tiwb.org. And for all the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at TIWB_news.
Very good. And before I also invite the panelists to the stage, I also wanted to invite Ms. Bjørg Sandskjær, who is the State Secretary from Norway, who has also been accompanying and investing in the program of Tax Inspectors Without Borders. And Bjørg, you will also reflect on what has been said throughout the discussions. So please, my guests, take the stage and we'll have the opportunity to interact and also virtually welcome. Very good. All seated. Honorable Professor Mthuli Ncube, who is the Finance Minister from Zimbabwe, I will start by asking you, with regards to your experience on mobilization and effective use of domestic revenues and how the Tax Inspectors Without Borders program has worked in contributing to the work that you do in Zimbabwe.
That's right. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this session. Look, you said it well, that the core resource for source of resources for financing SDGs and development has to be tax revenue, domestic tax revenue. That's very critical. And in our government, we're very clear about that. So at the moment, we have a revenue to GDP ratio of about 18%. And we're desirous to move that up towards 25%, which is where other countries like South Africa and the region are. That's very critical. And also to strengthen tax governance by making sure that our revenue-raising institution, which is ZIMRA, is strong from a governance point of view. Those are the first 2 auxiliary points. Now, when it comes to raising domestic taxes, there are key sources there, which is your VAT, value-added tax, corporate tax, pay-as-you-earn tax. And then we realized that we needed to introduce another tax called the IMTT tax, Intermediate Money Transfer Tax of 2%, where we tax transactions, electronic transactions. If you pay by mobile phone or by credit card, we take 2% of that as the government. And this has proved to be hugely beneficial in plugging the gap in terms of resource mobilization. We were able, when we first introduced it in 2019, within 1 year, we were able to shift our budget deficit from 13% to GDP down to 2.5% of GDP in 1 year. It was really, really helpful. And then the second year after that, we're able to balance the budget completely. So just using that innovative tax, and you're able to track your tax revenue collections every day. You know how much you're collecting every day from that, because the banks, the telecoms become your tax agents. The other area that has been innovative for us is taxing the informal sector. For what we did last year, in fact, was to introduce what we call a location tax. As long as an informal sector player operates from a building with a known address, the owner of the address is designated as a tax collection agent. So they collect from the informal operator, and we made sure that it is what you call a presumptive tax, so it's a flat tax of $1 a month, and it is very simple to collect. So we try to plug those areas. And looking at the work of the TIWB in Zimbabwe, it's been fantastic. For a start, this program, when we signed up to it in 2019, we got 2 experts from the South African Revenue Services, SARS, and they've been working with us from about May 2019 to September 2021. And during that period, we managed to recover $21 million US. Right? So they worked with our experts, 26 experts that eventually were working under them on the usual program of 2 weeks at a time and so forth. And what they were following up was on mining sector taxation, and also on transfers by MNEs across borders, just plugging the holes there. That is really worked well. It has upgraded the quality of tax audits within Zimbabwe. Revenue assurance has improved enormously. In fact, recently we appointed a new commissioner for Zimbabwe Revenue Authority Services, and she was head of revenue assurance. Just shows you how her skills were upgraded to a point where we felt she was the right person to have the top job. So it's been hugely beneficial, and we want to do more. Looking at other areas where we need further support, I think from TIWB, is in the area of taxation for the telecom sector. How many times do you in Africa, you receive a call from abroad, but it's coming from a local number? Then you know there's a revenue leakage. They do tricks. Telecoms companies are very clever. They originate a call from outside, it's received inside, then they regenerate it as a new call to the final recipient. And during that process, you easily lose revenue. If we can receive further help on this, it would be fantastic. The other area is in the area of taxation around the use of social media platforms. It's not very easy to do that. We know the OECD countries are trying hard as well. The whole shared economy, taxing the shared economy is not easy, and Africa is losing out. What happens is that you have got locally generated content, which is then consumed within the social media platforms outside, but the revenues are not coming in. We can't track this easily. We need help on that front. Now, finally, looking at again going back to the issue of revenue leakages with MNEs and so forth. I think we want to receive further help on how to set the appropriate levels of just mineral royalties. What is the appropriate level of mineral royalties? So it's not easy to sort of come up with the magic figure. We have, for instance, for platinum and lithium mining, initially we started at about 2.5%, and now I moved it to 5%. When I took it to the parliament, they were up in arms, saying, "Minister, you're too generous. You've been captured by the mining companies. Move it to 10%. So I said, okay, let's do a compromise. I was at 5, you're at 10, let's do 7%. So we're currently at 7%. But we know that we are just feeling our way around, and we need some help as to where exactly to pitch it. We've had to do something as well, innovative, we think, which is for some of the minerals, pay half the royalties in mineral. Yeah. So if it's diamonds, that 5% royalty in diamonds, half of it should be in mineral, hard mineral, which we store somewhere. If it's gold, it should be in bars of gold that we store somewhere. So we're playing around with those tricks just to deal with this issue of leakages and under invoicing and so forth by the mining sector. But we need some support. So I would say overall, TIWB has been hugely beneficial to us. We've benefited a lot. We just need this further support going forward in the other areas. Let me stop here for now.
Thank you so much. It's really a mix of, as you said, plugging the leakages, but also designing new reforms and ways of working. And I assume you've also been able then to build on experience from other countries. You were saying you were bringing in also experiences from South Africa other countries.
Absolutely. That's the advantage of TIWB, because you're able to bring in expertise and experience from other countries. SARS in South Africa, they're pretty good at managing tax systems. We've benefited from that. But also, we've made use of other platforms, such as TADAD, which is sponsored by the IMF as well, and others as well that we've made use of. So we learn from the best in terms of global best practice. We are learning from the best. Maybe one area where I think we need to upgrade fast is just on systems. We are currently actually evaluating various systems with the support of the African Development Bank. We have the best systems to make use of for domestic taxation. For customs and so forth, we have the usual called ASICUDA. Those who do taxes, they know what I'm talking about. ASICUDA system, the right modules, that's up to speed. But the problem there is smuggling. So experiencing smuggling of goods across the border, mainly between Zimbabwe and South Africa, partly because we also have a bit of a design issue. We don't have an official border control authority for physical borders across countries. We're okay with airports and so forth. Civil aviation would take care of that with the Ministry of Home Affairs. But for those cross-border issues, we don't have a border authority. So we're dealing with the border authority. It's a very important issue, that issue. So what we've had to do as the Tax Revenue Authority, we're now having to play other roles. So recently I launched a drone monitoring program where we use drones to monitor the rivers and the fences, just to cause some fright to those who are smuggling, to say, we are watching you. Don't try anything, don't cross, we are watching you. And we think those kind of things help. But it's dealing with those leakages, cross-border issues is never easy. What we've also done on the border between Zimbabwe and South Africa is we've concessioned the border to a private contractor. We gave them a 25-year concession to actually rebuild the border. They're about to complete it. And that again will help us a lot in because they have the resources to find, to source the best systems and so forth. We as government are always resource constrained. So that will also go a long way. Already, with the new border operating at half-mast, we've managed to increase revenues through that border alone by 30%. So already we had leakages and we're plugging those leakages. But we now need to plug the border, I'm being Zimbabwe specific, between Zimbabwe and Zambia. There's another one-stop border post. And then also the border to the east, Mozambique and Zimbabwe, where again you've got lots of leakages around, fuel being smuggled in. We need to deal with all of that, plug those holes. But border control is critical, a critical issue for revenue mobilization.
Thank you so much. Both systems, but also new technologies helping you in this. And I'm sure we will have a number of questions as well from our virtual audience and perhaps also from the audience present here. You were mentioning the parliament, so that gives me also a possibility to move to a parliamentarian. And Mr. Lunda, your experience from the Republic of Congo, how to, from the parliament perspective, also see how you can both challenge but also come up with new ideas on how to increase and improve the tax revenues, the systems for accountability and ways of working with this. Would be very interesting for us to hear your experience also from the Parliament's perspective.
Je vous remercie pour cette opportunité. Merci aux inspecteurs des impôts sans frontières, à l'Union parlementaire internationale et au PNUD pour cette occasion. Eh bien, nous, au niveau du Parlement de la République démocratique du Congo, nous sommes organisés dans le réseau des parlementaires pour les objectifs de développement durable. Et c'est dans ce cadre que nous travaillons pour essayer de faire avancer le combat pour l'amélioration des conditions de vie de nos populations. Le parlementaire au niveau du Congo, il a un rôle extrêmement important, un rôle crucial en amont dans la législation, dans la budgétisation et en aval, dans le contrôle. Il y a quelques années, notre budget était autour de 5 milliards de dollars. Avec l'avènement du nouveau gouvernement, il y a
budget. But with the
une...
new government, we have seen how the fight against tax evasion and corruption has increased. And 3 years on, we have a 15 billion budget. We see, therefore, how the budget has increased threefold and how efforts are improving to go ahead. Of course, what are the issues here? Well, with the National Tax Office, we are working to improve the system. On the one hand, with legislation, we need legislation that is focused on implementing SDGs, because the country has its own national strategic plan for development, and the SDGs are contextualized and being implemented in several provinces. But the biggest issue is that most parliamentarians are not aware of the SDGs, and they are not aware of the different legal mechanisms that we can use in order to achieve SDGs. They are not aware on how to mobilize taxes and increase taxes. So we have to inform them, and that is the role that we have as parliamentarians within the parliamentarians working network with the SDGs. And that's why in September we have had discussions with the United Nations, with the UNDP, with the Director General for Taxes, and we have decided to carry on with this work, and we have decided to further our work with tax inspectors without borders. This is how we are preparing in order to have a meeting with the National Tax Authority, with the parliaments, and with inspectors from Tax Inspectors Without Borders in order to establish a plan to mobilize these actions. We are talking about the DRC. DRC, modestly speaking, is potentially the richest country in Africa. And I come from the richest province in Congo, which has immense mineral resources. We have the biggest reserve of lithium reserve in the world, and so we have a potential bright future. But this can only be beneficial if the tax system is a clean tax system, if it's an organized and structured system, and only if parliamentarians are informed and trained in order how to control revenue. Only that way will allow us to achieve a budget of 100 billion, for example. This is what we want to obtain, to achieve. We are talking about SDG 17, but in order to achieve that development, then target 17, we need to achieve as well 16, peace. Peace, it would seem like all our efforts are being undermined by an insecurity situation in a neighboring country. In Rwanda, the Rwandan regime is aggressing our country. So our efforts are being undermined because our efforts are having to go towards defense. And it is unbelievable. It's incredible. This is why we call upon the international community to say that we all gain from peace. We all gain from investing in development rather than going against our neighbors. So in Congo, we are ready. We are ready to work with tax inspectors without borders and many other partners. The partnership will be beneficial when the parliamentarians, as I say, will be trained, will be informed to understand that revenue mobilization be focused on our development model. We can mobilize our own resources and we can achieve holistic development of our country.
Thank you so much. Moving from 5 to 15, but with the ambition in a resource-rich country like the Democratic Republic of Congo to move towards the 100 billion goal. Very interesting to listen to you, and not least also to understand the important role of the parliament, as was mentioned also by the minister from Zimbabwe, but also the need then for parliamentarians to be informed about the system as such, but also the potential and possibilities that lies within also holding the government to account, but also coming up with ideas on how to strengthen the system even further. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. Now moving online to you, Mr. Christensen, who is the director of the project of the Balanced Economy. One of the founders of the Tax Inspectors Without Borders idea. It's interesting, of course, to listen to you and perhaps also some reflections of what we've heard here, what we can do when we bring experiences together onto a platform like this, and how we can learn from each other. So what makes this initiative in a way a unique initiative, and what's your assessment as you listen to some of the examples we've heard here today, but of course also to the initiative overall? Over to you.
Thank you, and hopefully you can all hear me.
We do.
Great. Well, greetings from London. I'm sorry I can't join you in Geneva today, but thanks a lot for connecting me via video. So the idea of Tax Inspectors Without Borders originates from a series of discussions which I and a lot of colleagues in civil society had with various experts from developed countries and from developing countries. And crucially, we spoke at length with tax officials in Africa and Latin America, and we built very much upon their ideas. So what we had in mind at that time, and this goes back to 2009 or so, was to replicate the achievement of Médecins Sans Frontières by creating a model for international cooperation that can provide really tangible and sustainable institution building support for countries wanting to fight back against abusive tax practices. So that was the genesis of the idea. Now, as a founder member of Tax Inspectors Without Borders, at the core of my thinking is this very simple proposition that the best way of promoting sustainable development, and of course the Sustainable Development Goals, is to reduce countries' reliance on international aid and on external debt. That lies with creating strong and viable tax authorities, authorities that are equipped to tackle the abusive tax practices that have become very prevalent. So in the words of one senior tax official who I remember talking to at great length about this, the 21st century spelling for the word aid is TAX. Tax is the solution to many of the financing problems that so many countries face. Now, since Tax Inspectors Without Borders was launched in 2015, we can all see it. This initiative has emerged as a very successful and a cutting-edge player in providing development assistance to a very, very wide range of countries across the world. If we look at how it's developed, one of the most impressive parts of this development has been to see how many countries have come in both as host countries, but also as supporting countries, providing the expertise on a south-south basis and on a north-south basis. And I find that this kind of approach to international cooperation extremely encouraging. I suppose what I've seen over the last few years is that the practical assistance which Tax Inspectors Without Borders provides, this kind of learning by doing approach on live tax audit cases, has had tangible and very lasting results. And we've heard from two previous speakers that these results are measured in hundreds of millions of extra tax revenue every year. But there's a kind of hidden part of this, because part of the success of Tax Inspectors Without Borders is that it achieves improved tax compliance from corporations and others. People who might, organizations who might previously have taken the view that the risk of tax audit was fairly low, they're now much more likely to be tax compliant, because they recognize that the risk of a successful tax audit is very much higher. Now, for obvious reasons, we can't measure this change in taxpayer behavior, but this is nonetheless a really important and a very positive outcome of our work. And if we look at where we are at the moment, it's quite clear developing countries have every reason to want to tackle the dual problem of tax base erosion and profit shifting. Their governments also want to take effective action against other complex and abusive tax avoidance schemes which erode their tax bases and harm the quality of market competition within their countries. So in this respect, Tax Inspectors Without Borders has provided really vital capacity building through transfer of audit knowledge and audit skills. And this, I think, has enormous benefit to tax administrations who learn very practical skills and develop, in many cases, lasting relationships with the experts who come in and support them. And I think it's absolutely appropriate at this stage to also acknowledge the role that the Tax Inspectors Without Borders Secretariat provides. It's really at the core of the success of this initiative, because on the one hand, it identifies demand for assistance from the host countries and jurisdictions, and then it matches the needs of these countries, the requests these countries are making for assistance. It matches these requests with support from the Tax Inspectors Without Borders network of partner countries, and its very extensive roster of experienced and validated audit industry experts. And I think the Secretariat lies at the core of the success of this model. So I suppose, wrapping up, for me, it's been very encouraging indeed to know that this initiative has attracted a steady stream of very highly qualified and motivated experts who want to contribute their knowledge and experience, and that the net outcome has been a very, very practical support to many, many countries. As we've already heard from Zimbabwe and Congo, this is a very practical way of addressing the needs of governments wanting to achieve their sustainable development goals. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. And indeed, I mean, as was mentioned, one of the most important financing flows that can also be stable and be increased both through capacity building, but also the learning network. And then, of course, international rules and regulations. I mean, you were mentioning profit shifting, and need also to look at this, as you alluded to also from Zimbabwe. Ben Dickinson, leading the Global Relations and Development Division at OECD. How, from your perspective, can we ensure that development assistance for developing countries is as effective as possible? And looking at the G20 and OECD roadmap on developing countries and international tax, how can it be implemented?
Thank you, Ulrike. I guess effectiveness is quite a big word. So if I try and break that down a bit, I mean, if we come to Tax Inspectors Without Borders, how is that effective? Well, the first thing that we look at is the machinery of the partnership, and I would like to give credit to UNDP and the OECD teams for working out a very clear division of labour. So UNDP brings the development perspective and the network in developing countries, and the OECD brings the tax nerds, if you like, the highly technical people to work on these topics. So that's one level of effectiveness. I guess you spoke, Ulrike, at the outset about results. It's been critical for tax inspectors without borders to demonstrate results, and our primary metric has been additional revenues recovered on behalf of developing countries. And we believe, although we are in the billions of dollars, we are just scratching the surface. And there are many opportunities to gain much more revenue. But I think a niche initiative like Tax Inspectors Without Borders, when you talk about effectiveness, the highly technical element of this has to resonate with wider agendas. And I think it's particularly important at a number of levels. One is that what we're actually talking about is addressing a very important aspect of inequality and fairness. This whole enterprise emerged at the time when the G20 were putting a spotlight on the behavior of multinational enterprises and the fact that they were basically not paying their fair share of tax. And this initiative strikes at the heart of that. And it is a huge inequality agenda, because if the biggest and most high-profile taxpayers in the world are not seen to be paying their fair share, what message does that send to everyday taxpayers in rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa, for example? So there is a hugely important fairness and inequality agenda, which this niche project makes a direct contribution to. I think it's also important to note that this niche, as you've heard, is highly practical, and it complements a very complex set of international negotiations which are ongoing about rule setting in the international tax space. And whilst governments wrestle with, for example, the global minimum tax, which is now making very good progress in the inclusive framework on base erosion and profit shifting, and measures to address the digitalization of the international economy, which the minister from Zimbabwe has mentioned, the practical challenges there. How do you tax Facebook users, for example? Whilst all of that is being negotiated and that complexity is being deliberated on, underneath all that, governments need a highly practical form of assistance to show that they can get additional revenues back. So that agenda is critical. And then I guess finally, it's also very important to make the link between this highly technical niche work, domestic resource mobilization, and the ultimate achievement of the SDGs. And that narrative is very important for an initiative like Tax Inspectors Without Borders, whose stakeholders are the international development community, the ministries of finance, the experts, international organizations, but that's what actually binds us all together, ultimately, is trying to make a contribution to the SDGs. Maybe I'll come back on the G20 work, but if there's time at the end. Thank you.
You're more than welcome as well to comment on the G20 work, because of course the international perspective, if we look at the aspect of fairness, as you mentioned, is really key. It's the social contract that we see in countries, but of course it's the global social contract as well. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say the G20 has offered massive leadership since the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, when the original idea that something must be done to address what people then called tax havens and the profit shifting activities of large companies. And since then, the G20 has inspired a broad coalition of countries to work together. And it's important that this last year and this year, the presidencies of the G20 have been Indonesia this year, next year India, then it will go to Brazil and South Africa. Large developing countries are going to take the leadership of this agenda, And it is right that they are putting a spotlight on the fact that developing countries must be able to benefit from the overarching agenda set at the G20, which may seem quite distant for some low-income countries in developing regions. But they are doing that, and we're very pleased that Tax Inspectors Without Borders is in that mix, that the G20 have said we must have major capacity building operations starting to ensure that developing countries can, for example, implement the global minimum tax, which is being rolled out as of now. So, the role of the G20 has been very important in mobilizing leadership and resources and putting a spotlight on the needs of developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And definitely within the discussions in the UN and also in relation to the tax committee, we hear this call from many developing countries, the need to look at the international rules and regulations, and also taking note of the fact that Indonesia is one of the incoming co-chairs of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. So that also lays the ground, I believe, for this to continue to be an important topic also within the Global Partnership that we will continue, of course, to accompany also on behalf of UNDP. Now, over to you, Björg. Norway has also accompanied this agenda for a long time, and we actually met in New York where we were discussing these issues just some few weeks ago. When you look at this and when you also listen into the discussion, the experiences from Zimbabwe, from Congo, what are your reflections and how do you see that a country like Norway can contribute to this agenda, and what are your plans ahead?
Oh, thank you, Ulrika. Thanks for inviting me and Norway to be part of this discussion. You asked about Norway's approach to tax. And what we are doing in the international arena is really trying to share some of the lessons that we have drawn from developing our own welfare state, health, education, infrastructure, where I think I went to the same school as Mr. Christensen, where I also learned that these things are spelt TAX. And the same for financing. When we talk about financing for development, we need to spell that also TAX. And so our approach to tax and development involves support and collaboration with a broad range of actors, including multilateral partners. We're very active in the global space, and we can talk a little bit more about that a bit later. Civil society is very important. It's important for us to work with research institutions, to work with the media, and also with the governments. And it was very interesting to hear the experience both from Zimbabwe and the DRC in the panel. Because national tax administrations really need to be the cornerstone of our approach to strengthening sustainable tax systems. And we do believe that there is some untapped potential in this area, and I think that's what we've heard also from other panelists. In very practical terms, we do appreciate the great collaboration with both UNDP and OECD on the Tax Inspectors Without Borders. It was very good to hear also the practical experience from the countries represented here on this panel on how this is a very practical, hands-on approach that does provide the necessary support, and that Norway also is involved in, and that we also support. We know that the excellent work of Tax Inspectors Without Borders to date has helped collect an estimated $1.7 billion, which also helps to shed a light on the crucial role of effective taxation. And that again linked, and as we also heard from other panelists, it links to good governance and illicit financial flows. This is, again, the sort of flip side of what we are talking about. And the collaborative efforts of Tax Inspectors Without Borders in addressing those concrete challenges, we believe, is a leading example of best practices in capacity building. So that's very practical, and we need that approach, and it is the efforts at the domestic level to collect resources, that's important. But at the global level, there are discussions happening. So I thought I would just cut to those discussions. Where Norway is very involved in the discussions that are happening in the OECD that we heard about from a colleague from OECD here, where we believe the discussions that are happening with OECD and G20 around the two-pillar solution is at a critical phase. On our part, we believe we need to step up our commitment to ensure that this becomes as ambitious as possible, that it delivers results that effectively close existing and pervasive tax loopholes globally. And Norway is fully invested in making sure that this two-pillar solution succeeds, that we have successful discussions in the context of the OECD. At the same time, there are discussions happening at the UN, and Ulrika mentioned, I think, was the discussions that have just completed in the second committee, which we sometimes just call the tax committee. I don't think that's the official name, but but at least with the discussions we've had recently, again, about global thinking around how we get some global standards around tax. And we also see that important role in the UN for raising our level of ambition in this area. So we have the work happening in the second committee, but of course the UNDP's very important work in this field. It has a strong comparative advantage in providing, among other things, not just the global level discussions, but that technical assistance and policy guidance that is so important at the country level. So Norway supports the UNDP's Tax for SDGs program, as well as Tax Inspectors Without Borders. And we see great potential in the Platform for Collaboration on Tax, which is often just called the PCT, where the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, and the OECD all work together in our efforts on resource mobilization. Because we do believe it's so important that all the actors on the stage pull together and pull in the same direction and play to each other's strengths. If we need that comprehensive and coherent response to taxation and combating illicit financial flows if we are to see results. And we are quite excited now about the decision to have a new Financing for Development conference, which one of the decisions made in the second committee very recently was to look into having a new conference in 2025. And we remember that the previous one was in Addis Ababa in 2015. Also made some important developments were made in this area. So having that, those important discussions at the global level, we believe is very important to move the agenda forward. And then, of course, we need those very practical, hands-on initiatives such as Tax Inspectors Without Borders to, support countries in making this happen at the national level. I think I'll stop there for now, unless you have
thank you so much.
You'd like to raise.
Yes, no, thank you so much for those reflections. It's time to open up for discussions, both from you who are here present, but also for some online reflections and questions. And the first of them that we have also from our online audience is actually about the cooperation. Of course, the support that we through this initiative can give to the countries that we've heard about, but also the need to look at cooperation between international organizations. You alluded to this, what's happening within the OECD, the G20, as we've heard, but also within the UN. So perhaps moving back to you, Professor Nkube, Minister of Finance from Zimbabwe, when you look at what needs to happen at the international level and what your expectations would be with regards to negotiations taking place on these different platforms for you to be able to move forward with the ambitions that you have, what would you want to see?
Certainly, I would like to see some kind of coordination. We already have coordination in terms of development finance, which is really the aid flows. Maybe we could also have something similar for the various tax support organizations, UNDP, TIWB, OECD, and others, standard and so forth, coming together. And then we should have kind of regular engagements with them on various aspects so that we coordinate everything, whether it's around upgrading systems, the revenue assurance, quality assurance, If we can have that greater coordination, the better. So quite clearly there is thinking in that direction, and that's encouraging. We need that. We need to improve on tax administration. As we said, the core of resources for funding development and SDGs is domestic taxation, is domestic resource mobilization, and we must continue to, as I said, to innovate, think of new ways of collecting additional revenue using the best experiences around the world. In fact, I would like to even hear from anyone about how to improve tax collection in the tourism sector, which again is a global business. As you know, you could have an agent sitting here out in Geneva and processing, tourists into Congo, into Kenya or Zimbabwe, and then some of the revenues are captured here, and the country only receives a portion of it, partial. So just dealing with things like that would be very, very helpful, and I'm just citing one area. But coordination is very, very critical. We look forward to some platform being created which is similar to development, assistance coordination.
Thank you so much, and we should definitely, I think, those of us who are here also see to that we can keep all parties informed about what's happening on these different platforms, because we need that interaction from national governments also in relation to the changes and the expectations of these changes taking place both within the base erosion and profit shifting project of the OECD, but also what's happening within the UN. From the DRC perspective, additional reflections, if you also look at the need for you to be more informed about the changes that could possibly come at the international level, or some reflections also with regards to what we've heard here today.
Oui, nous sommes...
Yes. We are convinced that international aid at present will not make the country develop. We know that it is through our domestic resources we'll develop. As members of parliament, we need to be sufficiently informed to play the crucial role that is ours, namely efficient legislation for development and oversight of the government. In the Congo, the parliament plays a very important role, and it's necessary for members of parliament to have such capacity, such ability to enact legislation and provide oversight. And the Parliament of the DRC and the tax office are doing a lot in this regard and have expressed a need for some support. So the approach of the borderless tax inspectors is a very interesting one that we need to explore further. And at the level of the parliament, we also need an African network for an exchange of experiences among countries that have already experienced and benefited from the support of these tax inspectors without borders. And the Minister of Zimbabwe mentioned this, our fraternal country. We need to channel this work to move in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, we know the importance of parliaments with regard to oversight and, of course, the need to be informed and to be able to accompany. And also from the Norwegian State Secretary, we heard the importance of journalism and, of course, civil society organizations also in this regard. Let's see also if we have some questions from those of you who are here, and if you would want to come up and engage with us here on the stage, you're more than welcome. Anyone who feels tempted? Please, you have to take the floor here to get the mic. You're most welcome, and do start by presenting who you are. And perhaps if you would want to address the question to one of the panel members.
Yes, I do. I'm Alessandro Motro, the Interparliamentary Union. Very briefly, I just want to highlight in many places, I think there is a chicken and egg problem, whereby people, so leaving aside the corporate sector, ordinary people, taxpayers, don't see the point of paying taxes because they're not getting much for that money. So, why should I pay for public services that don't exist? On the other hand, governments complain, well, we don't get enough money, therefore we're not providing the public service. We're pushing people towards private sector services, where you have to pay out of pocket for what you need, healthcare, education, and whatnot. So how do we break this pattern? Some governments, I have to say, with some regret, kind of like that, because they do have the underlying ideology that private is better than public. That comes from the government themselves sometimes. We've seen it in both Europe and developing countries. So that negative loop gets even worse because the government in a way said, okay, fine, you don't pay your tax, that's okay. You're going to pay for your children's education out of pocket, you're going to pay for your healthcare out of pocket, buy your own insurance, and whatnot. So how do we break that pattern? I think we have to start by restoring faith in the public sector, in the role of the public sector. So I'll leave the word particularly to the Honourable Minister and the Member of Parliament. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. Is it Alexandra? I think I got that right. Thank you very much. That's a very important comment and question, which is how do you convince citizens that their taxes are working and that they should contribute willingly because that's the right thing to do. So at the end of the day, it's about the quality of services. So two strategies that we've used in Zimbabwe are as follows. The first one is just simple tax education, running campaigns, using the media, using seminars, using focus discussion groups under the title, My Tax Works. My Tax Works. And then we just try to show the link between tax payment, whatever we're collecting, with the provision of services. We think that we've made real progress in convincing citizens that their tax works. But it's always work in progress. You cannot say you are done. This is a continuous tax education program. We just have to do it as part of our outreach process. The other area is that the strategy that we've used is that of earmarking expenditure. So when I introduced the 2% IMTT, intermediate transactions tax, which was hugely controversial at the beginning, we had to make sure that in the first 2 years, we earmark a portion of those taxes for a specific project. So the specific project was a road between the border with South Africa all the way up to Harare. That's, you'd say, that's probably what, that's 700 kilometers, to say we've ring-fenced these resources to upgrade this road. So it was very clear, everyone could see it. The following year, it got better, because then we had COVID. So we then, again, ring-fenced the resources from that tax to deal with the acquisition of PPE, as well as vaccines. So basically, I used to argue that if you're looking for your 2% tax, it's in your arm. It is in your arm. That's the vaccine that is protecting you from COVID. So we find that actually trying to do that, it really helps in working with citizens and them understanding where their taxes are going. And it's not just talk. You actually do it. You earmark and actually do it. There are other areas where we know we have to do better and show that the taxes are working, which is usually the health sector, as well as the education sector, the social, key social sectors. We have to continue to work harder to show that the taxes are indeed delivering the better services for the benefit of the population. Maybe my colleagues from Congo has a lot more to say.
Je crois que les organisateurs.
Well, the organisers sat the governments next to the parliaments, so we can move the discussion towards parliament. So we consider it to be very complex in the case of parliaments, because it's a matter of governance. And in our country is a country, citizens pay taxes when they know what they're going to be used for and they're justified. So members of parliament have to pass on the message. They're closer to the population than ministers. So the members of parliament need to be well informed in order for the people to understand that government is carrying out the word that people pay taxes for. So it's a matter of civic education, and the people need to be informed. But for the people to be informed, the members of parliament need to be informed. So people will contact members of parliament, and the members of parliament will explain these are the reasons why you're paying your taxes, and this is what the government has done with your tax money. And if the government doesn't do what it says it's going to do, the members of parliament have the power to sanction the ministers. So I think it's that's what we need to work on. If members of parliament are better informed, better equipped, the population, the people, will be more inclined to pay their taxes, and the development will be able to be funded with natural domestic resources.
Thank you so much. And in that sense, be of support to government, but also hold governments to account. And as you said, inform citizens. Björk, maybe we could hear, because you alluded to in the very beginning as well, of course, Norway is a country that has built, as you said, its welfare state on an efficient tax system and trust in the system. So maybe some reflections also from you as a Norwegian politician.
No, absolutely. And these efforts to reinforce the social contract and trust are important in Norway as well. So it's not that we've made our system and we're done. We have to constantly prove that we are spending the taxes that we are collecting in a way that benefits people. But I was also reflecting on, one thing is to tax people's incomes, which we do, but we also manage our natural resources. We have, you may know that Norway has oil. For companies that want to come and drill for oil in Norway, you know how much tax they pay? 78%. So I'm just mentioning
Everyone is taking note now.
Sorry. So just and then we have had discussions with other countries around natural resource management and how far you can collect, part of the profits that companies are making from your natural resources and still be attractive. So I would just like to put that example out there.
I was intrigued by that 78%. I like it. So why? Because we think we've found oil and gas in some part of Zimbabwe, which is the same belt as Mozambique and the other parts of Africa, where again there's a similar geology, such as Uganda and so forth. And we've been really struggling to try to work out the best fiscal regime for that sector. So I think there's a lot to learn from Norway. Thank you very much. But also the other thing is, it's not just the tax aspect, it's also the level of shareholding. Do you say that as a foreign investor, you can own 100%, or there should be some minimum shareholding, so that again the citizens can get something from the dividends and capital gains upon exit? Because what you find at the beginning, the investors initially is your small investors, what you call the junior mining houses. They're the ones who come in to prospect and so forth. And then after discovering the gas or the oil, they then sell to the majors who have deep pockets, who develop and that's where the real money gets made. So in terms of capital gains, that's what you need to deal with, as well as the tax. But I'll come to Norway soon to learn a few tricks about how to do this. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much, and indeed, I mean, the importance of making sure that we use experiences across, in the UN setting, the member states, but really broadening also the initiative on the tax inspectors without border in that sense. Sometimes I think we have to question what is really the concept of a developing economy, because as you were alluding to as well, Björk, the work never ends as a politician to make sure that you can actually create trust and efficient systems. Perhaps as we have a bit more of time, also turning back to you, Mr. Christensen, also with some reflections, because before I will also ask for some closing remarks. Over to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that question from Alexandra was very helpful and very important, and it kind of makes me reflect a little bit about the multiple ways in which tax and tax policies shape developmental processes. We saw from the video right at the start that for the vast majority of people, they pay their taxes and they expect to have a wide range of services, crucial services like education and health, justice, security, road building, you name it. And the whole myriad of services provided by a modern state. And if they don't see them, these services being provided, they do become very disillusioned, not just with the lack of services, but with democracy as a whole. And I think this is a crucial part of understanding the way that tax plays a very sophisticated and in some respects unacknowledged role in developing good governance and relationships between citizens and state. Because tax revenues, I consider tax revenues as the lifeblood of democracy. It's simple as that. Without taxes, we wouldn't really have an effective democracy, because our politicians wouldn't have the resources which they need to develop, to provide the services that they are called upon to deliver. And that's why I think that the institution building work, which is carried out by Tax Inspectors Without Borders, is essentially an engagement in the process of developing sustainable and equitable government and democracy. And for me, that's part of what makes Tax Inspectors Without Borders a really unique capacity building initiative, because so many of our programs are really about developing the institutional framework which lies at the heart of the democratic processes. And I think we need to, I think, to perhaps beat the drums a little bit stronger about this part of how tax builds a modern democratic nation state. So this is a dialogue which I really welcome. I think it's extremely important to recognize that tax is not just an issue of developing, providing services, but it's also an issue about building trust, building knowledge, building a dialogue between the citizens who obviously pay their taxes and have very specific demands of their politicians and the politicians who serve them. So I think that's my key reflection on this part of the discussion.
Thank you so much. And transparency and accountability are also part of the key principles of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. And indeed, when we speak about trust, you can also look at the latest UNDP report for human development, where we could see that the levels of trust are all-time low, with only 1 out of 3 citizens across the world who actually have trust, even if you look at the close community. And this is something that we have to build from below, but also ensure that we can use these international regulations, but also the national regulations to improve the systems, to enhance and strengthen, as you said, the lifeblood of democracy. Before I turn to you, Mr. Dickinson, we actually do have one more question or comment from the floor, so I would definitely want to invite whoever wants to come to the stage. Yes, please, and present who you are. And also if you would want to direct your question to one of the or several of the panelists.
Thank you very much. My name is Penny Davis, and I represent the civil society delegation at the HLM. And I work for a Swedish organization called Diakonia, and we're also part of the Tax Justice Network Europe. and the Nordic Alliance of Tax Justice Organizations. And I just wanted to come back to the quality aspects of the DRM and tax discussion, which I think is also essential for the trust discussion, and refer to the Addis Tax Initiative Declaration stemming out of the Finance for Development agenda, which we are excited about as it adds a quality dimension both to revenue collection in developing countries, but also the provision of DRM support by donors. And maybe I direct a comment or question to all of you. One of the key commitments in the ATI is to strengthen progressive revenue sources and advance the level of progressivity in tax revenues, and to monitor the impact of tax policies on equity and gender equality. So I guess my question is, how do you see that play out practically, perhaps in Zimbabwe and DRC? And also Norway, I know you championed this agenda as a donor country, but there's also commitment in the ATI for policy coherence, which I think is key in the tax discussion, and for donors to assess their policies, not just the support they provide as donors, but the tax policies and how that affects the possibility of generating revenues in developing countries. So perhaps a comment on that. Thanks.
I will turn back to the politicians here on the stage, starting with Zimbabwe and then DRC and perhaps also Norway, if you have some reflections.
Thank you very much. Maybe I could have a go. Just two comments on that, on making sure the tax system continues to be progressive as we move forward. One way we try to do it in Zimbabwe, at least what I do every year, is to examine the tax bracket when it comes to PAYE, pay as you earn, and see whether there are opportunities to keep increasing the tax threshold. One rule of thumb is always to use inflation as your decision-making tool, to say that whenever inflation is positive, let's say it's 10% or whatever, you make at least a similar adjustment in your tax threshold, so that at least you continue to cushion the poor all the time. That's one way, and then the other is to use information on the basic living basket for an average household. An average household is consuming, let's say, 6 things. It's cornmeal, it's 1 kilogram of meat, or a vegetable, or cooking oil, or whatever. There's a basket, a basic basket. And that really becomes something that you work off from to see what's the cost of that basket per month, and then try to make sure that everyone can at least afford that basket. The other is just to use the poverty datum line, which also depends on the typical basket of consumption for an average household. So using strategies like that helps us to keep making sure that our tax system is progressive, at least on the income tax side. I can't say the same about things like VAT, which is a fairly blunt instrument, but perhaps there it's about making sure that the VAT on basic commodities either removed, but also maybe import duties. We've actually done this, where we've removed import duties on some basic commodities which were in short supply domestically, so that ordinary citizens can just bring in their rice package or flour package or cooking oil, especially with the challenges we see globally now with the price of cooking oil. We've had to remove those taxes. And then that goes a long way, again, in making sure that our tax system is progressive. Let me stop here for now.
Any experience with regards to gender budgeting or looking at gender as part of your tax system?
Oh yes, we have actually studied very seriously on gender budgeting, and in fact, I wish I would waive my copy of our gender-sensitive budget statement, because I've just presented the budget to Parliament a few weeks ago. But also we'll move on to deal with climate-sensitive budgeting as well. I'm just adding. So we, but also just being responsive to certain gender issues. For example, we introduced a budgeting for rural girls, for instance, in terms of sanitary wear. We included that, and then also proceeded to remove taxes and so forth on materials that could be used domestically to manufacture sanitary ware, for example. But there's a lot that we do to make sure that our budget is gender sensitive. And we request every accounting officer, which is like the permanent secretary below the minister, the head of admin, to sign off on the gender sensitivity aspect of the budget of their ministry. It's a requirement, and that's what I then present to Parliament ministry by ministry. So we take this very, very seriously. Of course, we have specific institutions that are focused on supporting women entrepreneurs. We have a women's bank. We also have a youth bank, which will also cater for girls in their youth in terms of supporting them as entrepreneurs. And every year, I allocate a budget to supporting the women's bank. And by the way, that's the best development bank we have. There is 95% repayment on loans. So more loans to women, they pay back. The other banks, I'm not so sure. So let me stop here for now.
Thank you so much. And let's see if we can perhaps also put a link to that policy online for those who would be interested to learn more, as we should be a learning network. Now, from the Parliament's perspective in DRC, when you look at progressive tax systems, any reflections on this or the other questions posed?
Oui, je crois que c'est ce que nous sommes en train.
Indeed. I think that's what we're doing. Our tax system is not sufficiently effective for this to really work at this stage. So we need to move towards a better adapted system that's fairer and ensure that those tax components that aren't covered yet are covered. So with regards to gender aspects, these are essential. So they must be incorporated into our overall tax system. And as the Minister was saying, we are at the heart of Africa. And so through our contacts with the rest of the world, we have to take that into account in our taxation system, given the climate and the current situation with the 10% reserves. So we must take these components into account, ensure a balance, so that those that work in the mining sector or other industries reach a balance between all of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then finally, perhaps also from a Norwegian perspective, was also part of the question, how you can look at your own tax policies. And you were also alluding to your active work, not only with Tax Inspectors Without Borders, but also on the UN and OECD platforms. So perhaps some comments.
Yes, absolutely. And first of all, I was just listening to some of the panelists, including Christensen, online on you said that taxes are the lifeblood of democracy. And just to underscore that, I think we probably agree, most of us, because we are here. But again, how important it is that we get this right, because it is about how we construct our societies and reinforce that social contract that is so important. There was a specific question around progressive taxation. So the government that I represent in Norway came into power just over a year ago, and at home we have increased the progressivity of our tax system. It was already progressive, but now we've made it even more progressive. So we've reduced taxes a little bit for those at the lower end of the income scale, and we've increased taxes for those at the higher end of the income scale. And we found there was room to do that, and still. Of course, there are always discussions, but we do believe that the social contract is still strong. At the global level, we remain very engaged, again, because this is such an important issue for us. So Norway was very involved in the preparations for the last Financing for Development meeting that took place in Addis in 2015, which came up with the Addis Tax Initiative that was mentioned from our colleague from civil society. There are some very important results that came out of the Addis meeting, and now that we have that decision to think about having another one of the Financing for Development conferences happening in a couple of years' time, it's important for us that we use an opportunity to bring the discussions forward, to take the discussions that are happening in the OECD and in the G20 context, take the discussions that are happening in the UN, and really try to advance this agenda at the global level, so that we get some global agreements that help us create that level playing field and help us get to where we want to be with supporting each other in implementing these important issues, decisions.
Thank you. Looking forward also to see your continued engagement also on these global platforms, as we also see some changes also taking place also within the UN. Now, some closing remarks from you, Mr. Dickinson. Some few final reflections.
Well, thank you very much, Ulrika, and thank you to the panelists. It's been an amazingly rich and diverse discussion. But so I don't intend to summarise, but just to pick out a few points from each of the speakers. I was struck from the minister's intervention about the importance of innovation and the ways in which you're using technology to keep up with, often with the ways in which businesses and companies are also using technology. So your point about using the mobile phone network through the tax system, and on the other side of the blade of the double-edged sword, companies are also using technology to exploit loopholes. So keeping up with all of that is clearly really important. And then the experience from DRC really shows the importance of parliamentary oversight, and also the critical role that obviously Parliament has in legislating. And we note in our work that there is often this very large gap between the technical level and the political level, and it's partly because the technical work is so bewilderingly complex, particularly when you're talking about cross-border taxation, that everybody's got to invest in making sure that the political level are completely up to speed with what's going on. And then I think John's point, which I've heard you make before, John, about tax being the antidote to aid dependency. Very important that we keep an eye on that, and also the longer term benefits that taxation has in general. And we've heard a lot about democracy and the role in which tax has played in bargaining between states and citizens, and in state formation overall. So let's not lose track of the longer term objectives. I think the point from Norway is very well made about the importance of international cooperation. This agenda is so big and so important and so strategic. This is not the preserve of one international organisation. And we've all got to work at different levels, international, regional, and at the country level, to ensure coherence. And I'm glad we mentioned the platform for collaboration on tax. This is what I call our peace agreement of making sure the four international organisations really cooperate and try and resolve some of the strategic issues before advice is given to developing countries. And then I think just possibly finally, the importance of what we call tax morale, which is the first question we heard about, this very difficult chicken and egg issue of why pay tax if you're not getting something back in return. We've done a massive amount of work on looking at this, and you can look at the resources online under the heading of tax morale, where some of the findings of global surveys of why people do or do not wish to pay tax are quite surprising. And it is not just the case that, well, people don't feel they're getting something back in return. That doesn't always shape their attitude towards tax. It's often because the state has not made it very easy to pay tax. They're putting barriers in the way to pay tax. So the whole debate is really complicated, highly context specific, and there's some very interesting survey work out there which, and I agree with the question. There's really important underpinning of everything that the state does on tax policy and administration should be informed by understanding what taxpayers really think. So some of these issues, many of these issues, will be taken forward by Tax Inspectors Without Borders, I'm pleased to say, with OECD and UNDP leadership. But let me leave it there, Ulrika, and thank you to you.
Thank you to you and to all of you, and we should end with an applause for all the work that has been done so far, but also really looking at expectations, also what can be done on these different platforms. So we will make sure as we upload this on different platforms online also to see if we can provide some links also to some of the reference that we've had in the discussion here today. Thank you so much to all of you and to all of you who have accompanied.